The plan was never for Flacco to step right into the starting role, right into a training camp competition maybe, but this was a crowded quarterback room that he was entering. Former first-round pick Kyle Boller had been hurt late the previous year, a game that saw him follow up that superb performance against the undefeated Patriots with a loss to the otherwise winless Dolphins. But you figured as the incumbent, he's still the inside track to starting. Then, in addition to former MVP McNair at backup, last year's third stringer and former Heisman winner Troy Smith also remained on the roster. Some fans were particularly high on Smith after he led the team to a feel-good season-ending 27-21 win over their hated rivals, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Sure, the Steelers were resting almost every important player ahead of a playoff trip, but by that point, the team hadn't won anything since Week 6 and were desperate for anything to hang their hat on.
All of this is to say that there was no guarantee Joe would get to see any meaningful action for the entire 2008 season. It's possible that the AFC North Ravens were hoping to emulate a strategy playing out in the NFC North in Green Bay. Brett Favre has been many things over the years. The all-time league leader in interceptions, a pretty despicable sexual predator, a several-time retiree, a white-collar criminal, but most importantly for the Packers, a 3-time MVP and Super Bowl champion. Maybe the team could have done more with the 11-time Pro Bowler, but for over a decade they did their best to capitalize on the kind of elite quarterback play that we've become so obsessed with. Unfortunately, franchises almost always last longer than players' careers, and so at some point, the Packers needed a contingency plan. Enter Aaron Rodgers. Much like Favre, there are less than savory qualities to him, so now it's become a lot funnier to look back on when he got passed over by not only his hometown 49ers with the first overall pick, but 21 other teams before he was finally selected by Green Bay after spending hours in the NFL draft's green room. This did, however, end up being a phenomenal landing spot for him. It might have been frustrating to start his career holding the clipboard, but it's generally agreed that the seasoning he received behind Favre on the bench over the next 3 years had some part in his career that he would go on to have. Entering 2008, Favre had finally, quote-unquote, retired, and now the team felt confident not just in Rodgers' skill, but his preparation as well.
About 900 miles away, the Baltimore Ravens opened training camp with an open question at the position, but one possible answer was almost immediately eliminated. After ending yet another disappointing season in pretty banged-up shape, Steve McNair announced his retirement on April 17th that offseason. The number of quarterbacks ahead of Flacco was now down to 2 as we arrive at the first game of the preseason, a rematch with those New England Patriots. The veteran Boller got the start and got some small measure of revenge as the team eked out a 16-15 win on the road in Gillette Stadium. But Boller was a meh 11 for 15 with 102 yards and a pick. Troy Smith, meanwhile, went 5 for 12 for 74 yards, and the rookie Joe Flacco got 3 pass attempts with no completions. The next week, we're back at home against the Minnesota Vikings, and the Ravens would put the ball in Troy Smith's hands to begin the game. After an interception just before the end of the half set up a Vikings chip shot field goal to extend their lead to 20-7, Baltimore took the same ball right out of Troy Smith's hands. Boller starts the third quarter for Baltimore, but after 3 non-scoring drives, the Ravens defense is now responsible for more points than the offense after their pick 6 and a 2-point conversion shortly thereafter in the fourth made it a 23-15 game. Boller starts his fourth drive with an interception on the very first play of scrimmage, and that is enough for Flacco to finally get a chance once Baltimore gets the ball back.
It's not the most encouraging start for the Rook. After a handoff to start the possession, Flacco was sacked and coughs up the ball before a teammate thankfully falls onto the fumble. The next play does at least see Joe's first professional completion, a 9-yard dart to Ernie Wheelwright, one of the most celebrated University of Minnesota receivers of all time, and owner of a grand total of 18 regular season receiving yards. Another sack and another short Ernie Wheelwright completion brings on the punt unit. But hey, we've thrown a couple of real live NFL passes now, if preseason does indeed count as real life. The Ravens get one more chance to even the score, though the Flacco-Wheelwright connection bears a little more fruit. They come up just 13 yards short of the end zone as time expires. Flacco's final line this time, 10-15 for 74 yards and a gift-wrapped interception that would have been the third for the Ravens that day if it was not thankfully called back due to penalty.
It was a bad game for the Ravens on the stat sheet, even if 23-15 doesn't look that bad. The stats aren't the only bad news on the day, though. Some particularly hard hits from Vikings defenders had hurt Kyle Boller pretty badly. He sustained not one, but 2 serious arm injuries, including a torn labrum and a biceps injury. When asked for details, Coach John Harbaugh admits he doesn't even know the medical term for the biceps one, but calls it a season ender as they placed Bowler on injured reserve effective September 3rd. That Vikings preseason game would be his last ever in purple and black. The quarterback race was now down to 2. Week 3 of the preseason, back in the classic 4-game format, would typically be when the first team saw the most action. And with Bowler's injury, sophomore Troy Smith was all set to get the bulk of those first team snaps. But if you thought a rookie NFL coach having to write off last season's incumbent starter for the year due to a bicep injury was an absurd turn of events, then we have just one question for you.
Have you ever heard of Lemieux's syndrome? No, don't lie. Of course you haven't. Neither had Troy Smith before September of 2008 when he was diagnosed with a case of tonsillitis the same week that Bowler was moved to the IR. But this was not any mere case of tonsillitis. Lemieux's syndrome is an advanced bacterial infection that is characterized by an intense inflammation of the internal jugular vein. And this is so rare that in the 5 decades leading up to this, only about 100 cases had been recorded. In a matter of days, Smith lost nearly 20 pounds due to the illness. There was absolutely no chance he was starting this game, which, after the preseason from hell, left the Ravens now with exactly one choice: Joe Flacco. His performance in that game against the Rams was charitably mediocre. The offense managed just 1 touchdown early in the third quarter, and Baltimore lost by a final score of 24-10. Flacco was just under a 50% completion rate, going 18 of 37 for 152 yards with 1 score. The fan base wasn't exactly champing at the bit to see more of the rookie, but at this point, there's basically no other option. As the regular season approaches, Smith remains sidelined, and it becomes increasingly clear that thanks to an early retirement, a torn labrum, and a laughably rare bacterial infection, the Ravens were rolling into 2008 with a rookie coach and quarterback together at the helm. Flacco's reward for this improbable series of events that led to him starting? A date with one of the Ravens' division rivals, the Cincinnati Bengals, led by quarterback Carson Palmer and coached by Marvin Lewis, the defensive coordinator for that Super Bowl 35 Ravens squad. John Harbaugh put his nasty wide receiver jet sweep kink on full display early on as Mark Clayton opened the scoring with a 42-yard double reverse rush to put the Ravens up early. The teams traded field goals before the end of the first half to make it 10-3, and then late in the third quarter, the Ravens once again scored on the ground, this time powered by the legs of none other than number 5 quarterback Joe Flacco, picking up his first career touchdown on a 38-yard scamper. A fellow Ravens rookie, running back Ray Rice out of Rutgers, showed a little bit of growing pains with a fourth quarter fumble that the Bengals capitalized on for a 65-yard touchdown return, but the Ravens defense managed to keep the Cincinnati offense from adding any points of their own later in the game. And with that effort, and a balanced rushing attack that got 229 total yards from the aforementioned Clayton, Flacco, Rice, and also veteran back LaRon McClain, the team managed to preserve a 17-10 lead. Joe Flacco, going a respectable 15 of 29 for 129 yards through the air, had won his first start in the NFL. And then instead of being able to build any kind of momentum off of this, Hurricane Ike slams into Houston and pushes Baltimore's Week 2 tilt against the Texans all the way to November, when they originally had their bye week scheduled. They are now saddled instead with a Week 2 bye week, meaning they are about to play at least 15 straight weeks of football, beginning with a couple more AFC North rivalries.
Baltimore's place in the AFC North division since realignment is unique insofar as it contrasts with the age and history of the other 3 Rust Belt franchises. But that history is most complicated when going up against their next opponent and the shadows of their former selves, the Cleveland Browns. Baltimore, playing the part of the artists formerly known as the Cleveland Browns, had a much easier go of it this time, even if the offense was only effective at best. All of their offensive touchdowns in the 28-10 win were goal line rushes, and Joe did throw his first 2 interceptions in this game while still waiting for his first career touchdown. But That's now 2 wins in the young QB's first 2 games. The next week against the Steelers, the good news is that Joe gets his first career passing touchdown. The bad news is that after Pittsburgh overcomes a late 10-point deficit to force overtime, a walk-off field goal hands Flacco his first loss and drops the Ravens to 2-1. Then, it's another loss to former AFC Central rival Tennessee the following week. Maybe Baltimore's favorite team to lose at home for no reason, as a second straight blown 10-point lead also features the 4th straight game in which Flacco has failed to crack 200 passing yards. He does so the next week against the artist formerly known as the Baltimore Colts, but it comes in a 31-3 loss, meaning that we've now seen in L3 featuring maybe the most poetically cruel trio of opponents possible for this particular franchise. That game, by the way, was 31-0 until a late Matt Stover field goal, as Peyton Manning is in the midst of yet another MVP season. He made it clear that even the vaunted Baltimore defense couldn't stop him at his peak. As Baltimore fans looked at what truly elite quarterback play could do against their team, it was fair for them to wonder, did we burn a first-round pick on a bust of a QB again? Is that elite signal caller ever going to suit up in the black and purple jersey?
Perhaps Joe heard the whispers, or maybe he just got more comfortable suiting up in the starting role that had never been tailor-made for him. Whatever the explanation was, beginning with Week 6 in Miami against the Dolphins, the Ravens won 8 of their next 9 games, with Joe throwing at least 1 touchdown in each of them while averaging a 96.2 quarterback rating. That mark over the full 2008 season would have tied Drew Brees for 4th in the league, behind only Phillip Rivers, Kurt Warner, and AFC East legend Chad Pennington. It would put him ahead of eventual MVP Peyton Manning, not to mention other big names like Aaron Rodgers, Tony Romo, and AFC North rival Ben Roethlisberger. And as if his passing wasn't enough, in Week 8 against the Raiders, he even managed a 43-yard reception that set the team up for an easy field goal 5 plays later. The kid and the offense as a whole was taking off, as the Ravens scored at least 24 points in all of those games, with the exception of their one loss, a clunker against the New York Football Giants. Did 5 of those games include defensive touchdowns too? Sure. But even if you wanted to call it a game manager offense, only 35 of the team's 238 points during this period came from the defense. The team suffered a bit of a stumble in the last 3, including a loss to Pittsburgh that gave them the season sweep and all but guaranteed them the division crown. But fans were high on Flacco, who finished his rookie season with just under 3,000 yards to go with a 60% completion percentage, 14 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions.
For Baltimore, the future was bright, but they also didn't need to wait until the future. Even now in the present, the 11-5 Ravens had snagged a wild card. We talked long ago about the exploits of Joe's father, Stephen Flacco, for the Penn Quakers, and how even in his limited role, he still managed, in the biggest game he played in, to show up in the biggest moment. We asserted then that this was due to perhaps some latent clutch gene, and if he had ever had that, we were soon going to get a chance to see whether or not it was hereditary. Flacco was ready to head to Miami, where that 9-game hot streak started, and where January Joe would now make his first start.
Let's say I told you that a rookie quarterback went 9 of 23 in his very first ever playoff start. Probably not all that surprising. After all, that's the kind of early career jitters you might expect from anyone in that situation. You might not be surprised that he only threw for 135 yards, that he also managed a single score with his legs late in the 4th and absolutely none with his arm. It shouldn't be shocking that all of this amounted to a paltry QBR of 59.1. No part of this should stun any of us. But what if I told you the Ravens won 27-9?
Through a powerful run game from the trio of LaRon McClain, Ray Rice, and Willis McGahee, the indomitable right foot of Matt Stover, and an opportunistic defensive score off of an interception by Ed Reed, the Baltimore Ravens traveled to Miami and handily defeated the Dolphins. The Ravens had finally won their first playoff game since that Super Bowl so many years ago. John Harbaugh got his first ever playoff win in his first try as a coach, on the road no less. And Joe Flacco not only got his first playoff win as a starter, but got the first win for a rookie quarterback starting in the playoffs in the history of the NFL. Much like Brady in that 2007 game just 13 months ago, the final line could almost be ignored. When the pressure was on late, the otherwise struggling Flacco delivered that lone score with his legs, delivering the final dagger by making it a 4-score game with less than 4 minutes remaining. And while it may have been too early for labels like elite to be mentioned, at the very least, the term clutch was being bandied about for the first time. An excellent job by the rookie, but could he do it again?
The next week, Baltimore's old playoff foes, the Tennessee Titans, would play host to the Dirty Birds as they flew into Nashville. To this point, each team had now hosted once prior, with the top-seeded home teams losing in shocking upsets in both of those occasions. On this day, the Titans drew first blood, scoring a touchdown in their second possession to go up 7-0. But Baltimore was ready to respond as Flacco launched a deep ball to his security blanket, Derek Mason, former Titan, who had been on the Tennessee side for both of the team's previous postseason matchups. Now on the right side of history for the first time, his 48-yard touchdown reception tied the game at 7-all.
Then, the scoring stopped dead in its tracks. Baltimore punted on each of their next 5 possessions, not including a kneel down to end the 6th one at the close of the second quarter. Tennessee was even more hapless, as on their next 7 possessions, they only punted 3 times, and committed turnovers on another 3 with a pair of fumbles and a pick. A missed 51-yard field goal rounded out the 7, meaning that when the Ravens finally put fresh points on the board with a 21-yard chip shot on the second play of the fourth quarter, it was enough for Baltimore to take a 10-7 lead. 10 minutes further into the quarter, Tennessee finally responded with a field goal of their own. The teams found themselves knotted at 10-all, with the Ravens set to receive the ball, needing to score in the final 4:17 of the game. Once again leading on their run game to gain yards and burn clock, Flacco led the squad all the way down to the Tennessee 25-yard line before settling for the go-ahead field goal. After a 4-and-out from the Titans that ended with 3 straight Kerry Collins incompletions, all Joe had to do was one more kneel down in order to become the first rookie quarterback now to win their first 2 playoff starts. And there were never any upsets in Ravens-Titans playoff games ever again.
The mood in Baltimore was electric. The rookie coach and quarterback duo could not be stopped. Never mind that his overall line was a solid but fully unspectacular 20 of 45 for 296 yards and a touchdown. Never mind that the defense in this game had once again led the way, with a lot of the dirty work done by heart of the team Ray Lewis, who, by the way, topped the league this year in approximate value, or our new favorite stat, AV. As we've said before, quarterback play drives the league, and so quarterbacks drive the narrative. Now Flacco had a chance to write one hell of a narrative, as he was set to become the first rookie ever to start a conference championship game.
His opponent had already gotten the best of him this season, but maybe now that the calendar had turned to January, things would be different. Time to take one more crack at those Pittsburgh Steelers. Joe was heading to the town where his college dreams were once deferred, carrying the hopes and dreams of the city of Baltimore on his shoulders as they hoped they could learn from their past mistakes. At the beginning of the second quarter, Baltimore had gained a grand total of 21 yards and 4 drives. It was a miracle that after Roethlisberger rifled a 65-yard touchdown to Santonio Holmes, they only trailed 13-0. Baltimore finally got a bit of a drive going after this, but a brutal Flacco sack on 3rd and 6 forced the punt unit onto the field yet again for the Ravens. After the defense continued to hold up its end of the bargain, limiting Pittsburgh to just 1 first down and forced another punt, special teams decided to do some damage as returner Jim Leonard took the punt for 45 yards before fumbling it out of bounds, setting up beautiful field position that was close enough even for this anemic offense to capitalize on with a touchdown, with a little help from defensive pass interference. With the score now 13-7, the Ravens finally had life. Then they punted on their next 4 drives, failing to move the ball even 20 yards on any of them, with the margin growing even larger as the Steelers managed a 3rd field goal to extend their lead to 16-7.
To start the fourth quarter, the Ravens defense yet again stymied the Steelers. And after that punt, Joe led perhaps the best drive of the day, feeding receivers Mark Clayton and Derek Mason before Willis McGahee punched it in from the 1-yard line. Steelers 16, Ravens 14. And after the defense forced yet another critical stop, Flacco had the ball as well as the game in his hands. Facing 3rd and 13 from their own 29, Flacco needed help. And as he often did, he turned to his security blanket, Derek Mason. Pittsburgh safety Troy Polamalu anticipated this, picking Flacco off at the 40-yard line and running it all the way back to the house for a devastating swing. After the extra point, it was now Steelers 23, Ravens 14. And the game still had one more near tragedy up its sleeve. On the second snap of their next drive, Flacco threw a frozen rope to Willis McGahee, who turned and looked ready to move through traffic for what could be a significant gain. Expected to be the bell cow coming into 2008, McGahee had suffered a lot this season, relegated to the sidelines for much of the year due to injury, while the rookie Rice and LeRon McClain, who officially was a fullback, soaked up the playtime in his absence. Here was his chance to finally be the hero after so much frustration. Then Ryan Clark happened.
Full disclosure, when I saw this hit as a young Ravens fan, I assumed I had just watched Willis McGahee die. Ryan Clark lays him out, blasting the ever-loving shit out of him in a completely legal hit that is the first time I really questioned the foundation of this sport. Not only that, the ball was knocked loose and recovered by Steelers linebacker Lawrence Timmons, and so even as the team receives signs of life from McGahee while he is carted off the field, all the while they knew that Pittsburgh would have the ball when play resumed. Even now, dominant defense couldn't help but get one more stop against the Steelers, but 3 plays after getting the ball back, Flacco threw his third and final interception of the day to seal the deal. The Ravens had just played a football game every week for 4 entire months, winning 12 of 18 of them, but their season had ended with 3 straight drives resulting in turnovers. And then 2 weeks later, the Pittsburgh Steelers were Super Bowl champions. Flacco wasn't particularly high on the list of anyone's award ballots at the end of the year, except for, of course, winning the Pepsi Rookie of the Year award. And even the most chipper fans in Baltimore would admit that the way they left the playoffs did leave a little bit of a bitter taste in their mouths. But even the least charitable view of this season had to consider it a success, even if it wasn't necessarily resounding. A team without a playoff win in nearly a decade, under a rookie head coach and a rookie quarterback, had made it all the way to the AFC Championship game and had been just a few late drives away from a Super Bowl appearance. As it had seemed before the playoffs, there was still a very bright future ahead for Baltimore.
It would be great if developmental progress for athletes was linear. If you entered with a certain skill set, with a certain quantifiable measurement of your proficiency at that skill set, and then with time, you just consistently got better for as long as you could until a predictable and uniform aging curve eventually began the inevitable attrition to your talents. If we could know and predict what was going to happen to young players throughout their careers and adjust our expectations accordingly. If that were the case, though, front offices and coaching staffs would have little reason to exist outside of drawing plays. Player development has a similar governing principle as real estate. Location, location, location. Context matters immensely, which is why even top overall picks can flounder, given that if you're heading to a team that just had such a high pick, they either currently suck or very, very recently sucked. Before the Ravens drafted Joe Flacco, they had spent the first 12 seasons of their existence going 96, 95, and 1. It would be nearly impossible to be a more middle-of-the-road franchise than that. There were definitely worse places for a prospect like Flacco to land, but this also wasn't an organization that had made its living on the back of offensive development.
Running back Jamal Lewis was the offensive engine of that Super Bowl 35 team his rookie season, and went on to become the 5th ever 2,000-yard back in 2003, during which time he also set the single game rushing record with 295 yards, until Adrian Peterson topped that 4 years later. But through all of that, Jamal wasn't even the most famous Lewis on the team, and he would only average around 1,000 a year for 3 more seasons before a kind of contentious split with the team. In the passing game, Baltimore had only managed to produce a 1,000-yard receiving season in half of those 12 years of existence, and 3 of those years their top receiver failed to even crack 800 yards. The single-season passing record still belonged to Vinny Testaverde, who threw for a whopping 4,177 empty-calorie yards during the team's inaugural 4-12 campaign. Since that season, their leading passer had only managed to throw for 3,000 yards twice. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, Baltimore has a core 4 as good as any other team's. Super Bowl 35 MVP Ray Lewis is still there as he continues to build his Hall of Fame credentials, along with fellow first-round pick out of the University of Miami, Ed Reed, in the secondary. And up front, Terrell Suggs and Haloti Ngata keep opponents' pockets as collapsible and uncomfortable as possible, with help from a rotating cast of mid to late round gems unearthed by Newsome who will go on to cash out in free agency. At the beginning of every season, the floor of this team is defined by this defensive unit, but it's going to be the offense that determines its ceiling. For all of Flacco's shortcomings, it's not like there had been any demonstrably better quarterbacks at the head of the team at any point in its history to date. Dilfer, Gerbach, Bowler, he has already been as good as any of them. The question is whether he can be better, whether he can be good enough not just for the team to win games, but a second Super Bowl championship. And that is going to depend on the pieces around him in this environment as much as it will on his own skills. There are going to be two key pieces in particular over the next few years. Let's take a second to acquaint ourselves with one of them now.
If being a coordinator is one of the best resume builders for being a coach, then being a washed-up coach can similarly be said to be one of the best resumes when looking for work as a coordinator. Cameron had been head coach of the Miami Dolphins in 2007 when they finished a woeful 1-15, squeaking out that lone win in overtime against the Ravens. Despite the 4-year contract he signed prior to the season, Cam was canned on January 3rd, setting Miami up for their 5th head coach in as many years. But Cam's done with Miami now, and he didn't have to wait long for his next opportunity. Less than 3 weeks later, one of John Harbaugh's first acts as head coach of the Baltimore Ravens was to bring Cameron on as his offensive coordinator, hoping that his attempt to squeeze the juice out of Cameron's odyssey as an offensive football mind would prove more productive than Miami's. Cameron wasn't always just a football mind. If you knew, for instance, that he was born in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and shortly thereafter moved to Indiana, you might correctly imagine that he had a passion for basketball as well growing up. He continued to play both sports all throughout college at Indiana University, with the absolutely bonkers pair of coaches in Lee Corso for football and Bob Knight for basketball. When he expressed to Knight his interest in pursuing coaching himself during a 1984 Team USA practice, Knight was initially dismissive. Cameron had just graduated with a business degree, and Knight thought he was too smart to waste his time with coaching rather than law school. Eventually, though, Knight would be the one in 1984 to coordinate a graduate assistant position for Cameron to give him his start, and that's how he landed on the football staff at Michigan under Bo Schembechler. Cam spent the decade in Ann Arbor, going from grad assistant to wide receivers and later quarterbacks coach, and working with Ravens legends like Elvis Gerbach and Jim Harbaugh, amongst others. After that decade, Cameron got his first taste of NFL action with the Washington football team in 1994, serving as their quarterbacks coach, and he was given heaps of credit during his run by guys like Gus Frerotte and Trent Green for career performances during their time as Washington starters. With a track record of success now at both levels, not just with offense in general, but with that important quarterback position, it's little surprise that after a couple years with Washington, his alma mater of Indiana University offered him his first real head coaching opportunity.
Now, Cameron's tenure at Indiana is not successful in the classical sense of winning football games. In his 5 seasons there, he went 18-37 overall. But while the team didn't win a lot, Cameron continued to receive plaudits for the offensive development of his players like star Antoine Randall, the first ever player in NCAA history to rack up 4 straight years of at least 2,500 yards from scrimmage. Between stories like that and his high graduation rate for players, he got a great reputation as a developmental coach during his time. But that's kind of a nice way of complimenting someone who, again, isn't actually winning a lot. So Indiana fired him after his 5th season in charge. Like we said, though, no better landing spot for a washed-up head coach than the coordinator position. And so Cameron made his way back to the NFL by way of the San Diego Chargers, taking the offensive coordinator position under newly hired head coach Marty Schottenheimer. He stepped into a pretty good situation offensively. Drew Brees wasn't Saints Drew Brees yet, but he could still get you a 3,000-yard season without too much trouble thanks to the skill position players that were flanking him, most notably tight end Antonio Gates and running back LaDainian Tomlinson. The first 2 years under Schottenheimer and Cameron, the offense finished 20th and 16th in the league in points scored. In 2004, the 3rd most points in franchise history, that jumped all the way up to 3rd and earned Cameron Sports Illustrated's Offensive Assistant of the Year honor. After a bit of a step back in 2005 to just 5th in points scored, they leapt all the way to the very top of the heap in 2006, the first with quarterback Phillip Rivers now under center. Tomlinson got the single-season touchdown record, he won Offensive Player of the Year, he won MVP, he won everything except for a playoff game, as they got bounced in the divisional round that year. This led to Cameron's hiring by Miami, and we already talked about how that went wrong. It would have been understandable if NFL teams didn't go right back for another bite of the apple after that 2007 debacle. Good thing then that back in 1997, thanks to the Michigan connection by way of Schembechler and his brother Jim, Cam had given a young John Harbaugh a prime spot on his Indiana coaching staff right before his own entry into the NFL. In hiring his old boss and returning that favor, Harbaugh had now tied the wagon of his franchise quarterback's development to the horsepower of his old boss. Time to see how much better they can get.
Over the next few years, the answer to that could not have been less clear. Through 2011, the defense kept up its end of the bargain, staying at exactly third in points allowed for all of Flacco's first 4 seasons. And in the first year after that initial playoff run, the offense seemed to take a step forward. Flacco added bulk to his stats, throwing for 3,613 yards and 21 touchdowns. And even on those increased attempt numbers, both his yards per attempt and completion percentage both ticked up, with the Ravens going from a bottom-of-the-barrel passing attack to a solidly middle-of-the-barrel one. The team's record dropped 2 games down from 2008 to finish 9-7, but that was still good enough for a wildcard spot, and Flacco continued to stack up wins in January at a prodigious rate for a young player. Already, he was now the first player to start playoff games in each of his first 2 seasons, and after a 33-14 thrashing of the Patriots that was over before the first quarter, he became the first player to win playoff games in each of his first 2 seasons as well. His detractors would point out that he threw the ball 10 total times in that game. But what do those detractors know about winning? Maybe a little bit something, because the next week the Ravens do get the absolute shit beaten out of them in Indianapolis, but hey, maybe 2010 will be the year. Flacco posts another slightly improved regular season line, and the team actually has its best season yet in the Harbaugh-Flacco era, going by the most important stat, quarterback wins, with a 12-4 record. That is still only good enough for a wild card finish, meaning that they start the playoffs back on the road for a 3rd straight year. And wouldn't you know it, for a 3rd straight year, Joe Flacco and John Harbaugh win a road playoff game, this time in Kansas City. And this one, Joe actually helps win in a big day for him. His 25 of 34 performance nets 265 yards, 2 scores through the air, and 115.4 passer rating to go with 26 rushing yards on top of that. Finally, there is a performance to back up the now 4-2 playoff record. Unfortunately, the next week is a trip to the Steel City. And despite a strike to Todd Heap before the end of the second quarter to go up 21-7, the Birds end up laying such a terribly rotten egg in the second half that Pittsburgh outscores them 24-3, keeping Flacco and Baltimore out of the end zone for the entirety of that span. Another disappointing end to be sure, but one that did maybe distract from the real progress that was going on for Joe. Whiplash from a pair of wildly different Flacco starts like that pair in January had been pretty customary in his career to this point, as he frequently had some of his best performances between absolute shit shows. Going by passer rating, a 2009 3-game set against the NFC North from weeks 13 to 15 saw season highs of 135.6 and 120.8 against Chicago and Detroit, as they won by a combined score of 79-10 in those games. It also featured by far his worst game of the season in Green Bay, as the Pack held him to a 27.2 rating in a 27-14 loss. Flacco still had a clunker or 2 in him this past season, but the distribution is getting narrower and narrower as he becomes more consistent. Whatever Cameron's doing is at least working insofar as helping Joe improve. But at this point in our story, it's also probably important to remember that an offense needs more than one star.
When Cameron was coming into his new position, you could see the bones of a similar situation to the one he entered in San Diego, namely in the form of an offense where the 2 best weapons at the time were a running back in Willis McGahee and a tight end in Todd Heap. Heap would indeed be a major weapon during Flacco's developmental years, but someone other than McGahee had emerged from that backfield by committee that the 2008 team had devolved into. And this is the second individual that Joe was going to need to come with him on the journey towards offensive apotheosis. Remember the school that offered Flacco his very first scholarship, Rutgers, and how his decision not to go there, of course, led to a whole odyssey around college playtime? Well, it also led to the long delay of maybe his most fruitful football partnership, the one he shared with Ray Rice. Rice had caught the eye of Rutgers coach Greg Schiano as a member of the New Rochelle Huguenots in high school. As a starter in his 3 seasons of varsity ball there, the team lost a total of just 3 games, and one of those was in their second straight trip to the championship game in his senior season. While they didn't repeat, he did enough to join the Rutgers Scarlet Knights as the bell cow tailback in his freshman year, and he had none of Joe's issues in finding his way onto the field. After starting and rushing for over 1,000 yards as a freshman, Rice put those marks to shame in 2006. I don't know how to better sum it up than to remind you that Rutgers is the very literal progenitor of college football and has been playing since 1869. And Ray Rice broke the school record for rushing yards in the season by 441. Sure, Rutgers was largely a pretty backwater program for much of that century and a half, but that just makes it all the more bonkers that a legitimate Heisman candidate was playing at Rutgers. After the regular season, Rice and the Scarlet Knights played the Kansas State Wildcats in the first ever Texas Bowl, and with a 37-10 victory, they secured the first ever bowl win in program history.
Returning for his junior year, Rice set the school record for most career touchdowns in October, then set the single game record in November, and after a whole month of setting no records, decided to double up in January with a monstrous performance in the International Bowl against Ball State. In a 52-30 bloodbath, his 280 yards was not just his career high, nor was it just the single game record for Rutgers. It was enough to beat his previous single season mark by an additional 218 yards. When Ray Rice came to Rutgers, it stood at 1,353 and had stood there for 30 years. It was now 2012. There would be no senior season. Rice entered the 2008 NFL Draft and was the Ravens' first selection on day 2, going 55th overall in the second round. As injuries slowed veterans McGahee and McClain in his rookie year, Rice quickly rose to the top of the running back room playing next to Joe Flacco, with the Pro Bowl sophomore season where he racked up over 2,000 yards from scrimmage, with 702 of them coming on receptions from his quarterback, making him the second most productive pass catcher on the team behind Derek Mason. By 2009, only 36 other running backs had amassed that many receiving yards in a single season. And the list of 9, including Rice, that had now done it in this millennium, included names like Marshall Faulk, Steven Jackson, and LaDainian Tomlinson. With a second-team All-Pro nod that season to go with his first Pro Bowl appearance, Rice was already a top-tier back in the league heading into year 3. A slight dip in production in 2010 did little to change that perception, but if it did, 2011 was ready to change it right back. This year, Rice again topped 2,000 total yards from scrimmage, setting a new career high with a league-leading 2,068. And, much like 2009, he topped 700 yards receiving this year as well, providing a constant safe checkdown presence for Flacco and Cameron to rely on in addition to his 4.7 yards per rushing attempt on the ground. Between the defense once again ranking 3rd in the league in points allowed and the offensive trio of Cameron, Rice, and Flacco giving them enough on that side of the ball, John Harbaugh coaches the 2011 Ravens to a 12-4 record, which is good enough this time for his first ever divisional championship as a head coach. And with the division title comes one more guarantee. Joe Flacco was finally going to start a home playoff game.
Let's just take a moment to acknowledge that if you are keeping track at home, this does indeed make Joe Flacco officially the first quarterback to make the playoffs in his first 4 seasons, when the Ravens get to start their run after a first-round bye at home for the first time. He and the Ravens host the Houston Texans in the divisional round with a chance to now make it 4 straight years, not just with an appearance, but a win to start his career. Completely unprecedented. The Texans of this era feel like an appropriate team for the Ravens to host, a kind of like funhouse mirror reflection of them. Much like the Ravens, they were the new second franchise in a city that had held another one very near and dear to their heart, with the Houston Oilers having departed Texas to become the Tennessee Titans. And much like the Ravens, at their core, they were powered by a generational defensive talent, future Hall of Famer J.J. Watt. Much like the Ravens, they also managed to win a lot of games despite having quarterbacks that carried that dreaded game manager label. During the 2011 regular season, that game manager had been Matt Schaub, but they couldn't even call him the 30-year-old veteran journeyman at this point because of injury. So rookie TJ Yates instead lined up under center in just his 7th career start after playing out the string in the regular season and leading Houston to a surprising upset win over Cincinnati the week prior. But against a real AFC North defense, he looked every bit the part of a rookie fill-in. His 3 interceptions meant that despite the Ravens going almost 45 minutes between scoring in the first and fourth quarters, the Texans simply couldn't play mistake-free long enough to ever claw their way back. And with that win, the first one that Harbaugh and Flacco had ever gotten to share with their home crowd, the long 3-year wait dating back to their shared rookie season was over. Joe Flacco and the Baltimore Ravens were back in the AFC Championship game.
Against Houston, Joe played what a radio caller might call smart winning football. Stat-wise, that translated to a pretty mediocre 14 for 27 with 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. No turnovers, sure, no huge mistakes that would torture the team, but certainly not a stellar performance. Nonetheless, Flacco was now 5-3 in the playoffs in just his 4th year as a starter. He had already tied the record at the time for most road playoff wins by a quarterback all time. Not in their first 4 seasons, for their careers. And now he had a chance to take sole possession of that record and to lead Baltimore back to the promised land a decade later. All they need to do is beat the New England Patriots. New England is in a weird place. Since the 18-1 season, they've won 48 games in 4 years, by all measures an astoundingly good mark. But the first of those came with that Brady fellow injured and on the sidelines for nearly the entire season. The second of those came in that shocking 33-14 loss to the same Baltimore Ravens in 2009 that was over before it began. And then just last year, they lost to another bizarro version of the Ravens, the division rival New York Jets, led by former Ravens coordinator Rex Ryan and professional Joe Flacco echo Mark Sanchez.
And so, with all of this being the case a decade into the Brady-Belichick relationship, even though they are champions 3 times over, some of the shine is starting to come off. Just imagine the discourse if the elite quarterback and former MVP Tom Brady loses a second game at home in the playoff to that game-managing bum Joe Flacco. Well, good news if you have a bad imagination. Joe Flacco is absolutely up to the challenge of going toe-to-toe with Brady this time. He eclipses that 10 pass attempt mark from the last playoff trip here by the end of the first quarter. And by the time the fourth quarter rolls around, Baltimore has just extended their lead to 4 points with a field goal to make it 20-16. If Pat fans felt nervous, they were soon able to take a breath of relief as the Patriots quickly responded with a touchdown to reclaim the lead and make it a 23-20 score. That relief only grew as Joe finally blinked on the next drive, making his first real mistake of the night as Brandon Spikes got an interception at midfield. But Brady simply cannot get out of his own way. The volume of those rumors about his ability to get it done in the clutch start to pick up, as on the first play of the subsequent Patriots drive, a deep bomb in the middle of the end zone was picked off by Jimmy Smith, giving the ball right back to the Ravens with a chance to drive for the win. Rice and Flacco get the Ravens about 50 yards downfield before the drive stalls out on 4th down at the New England 33. But once again, Tom Brady simply does not have it in him to beat this Baltimore defense, and they force a 3-and-out punt with 1:44 remaining. Flacco and Rice got the birds here together, but with so little time on the clock remaining and only 2 timeouts, the ball rests squarely in Flacco's hands. Receptions by wideout Anquan Boldin and tight end Dennis Pitta moved the ball to Baltimore's 39, where after they use their second timeout, Baltimore gets the jolt they need as Boldin takes a short catch and run 29 yards downfield to get within field goal range. Another 9-yard reception from Boldin later, and it's 2nd and 1 from the 14-yard line for Flacco and the Birds.
The next play, Joe drops back and sees veteran Lee Evans in the end zone. Evans has been here plenty in his career, even if this is his first year with the Ravens, because for 7 seasons, he played atop the wide receiver depth chart for the Buffalo Bills and faced the AFC East rival Patriots twice a year during that time. In the 7 years with Buffalo, he did not win a single game against the New England Patriots, going 0 for 13 over that span. He also never went to the playoffs during his time in Buffalo, so this postseason trip and his first go-round with the Ravens has been a treat that he has made the most of. While it's only been 2 games, he's so far caught all 4 of his first career postseason targets for a very nice total of 69 yards. Evans turns to look as target number 5 comes his way and falls into his hands. Evans has it. I mean, really, he has it. He takes a single step, but before a second one can establish possession for the go-ahead score, Pats cornerback Sterling Moore knocks it from his hands, and it falls to the ground incomplete. The next pass, this time intended for Dennis Pitta, is again broken up by Sterling Moore, setting up now 4th and 1 from the doorstep of the end zone. On comes the field goal unit, and place kicker Billy Cundiff. When the Ravens came to town, they brought with them an absolute legend of a kicker in Matt Stover, who lasted all the way up until Flacco's rookie season with Baltimore. But since then, after the false start of Steve Hauschka, Billy Cundiff stepped up to fill the incredibly large shoes of Stover with his prodigious foot. His foot has been a boomer this year, tying the league record for touchbacks, albeit with the help of a new kickoff rule. But distance is not what's needed right now. At 32 yards, this is about as much of a layup of a field goal as you could ask for in a late, potentially game-tying situation. And with a mix of 39 and 20 yards already on this day, there is every reason to believe that the Ravens still have a chance if they can just get it to overtime.
Here comes Billy Cundiff to tie this game and in all likelihood send it to overtime. The last 2 years, 16 of 16 in the fourth quarter on field goals. 32 yards to tie it. And the kick, look out! Look out! It's no good! It's no good!
Elite is a production of Remember That Guy. Written, researched, and recorded by James Lentzweiler, Justin Diaz, and Xavier Perez. All music is provided by RTG's musical director Don Ham, and sources for additional audio and all of our research can be found in the episode descriptions. More information on Elite and all things RTG related can be found at bit.ly/rememberthatguy, all one word, all lowercase. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing it. Word of mouth is our best, and only, sponsor. Until next time, thanks for listening.